Hello everyone, I'm JG. Welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing Metallica's 6th album, Load. Before getting into the actual review today, I want to remind anyone that I'm reviewing all of Metallica's albums here on my channel, and there's already a playlist that exists that's going to be linked down in the description below and annotated at the end of the video that you can check out, where all the Metallica reviews that I've already done are already in there, as well as all the future Metallica reviews that I'm going to be doing will eventually be in there as well. So make sure you check that out if you're a Metallica fan and you want to see my thoughts on Metallica's previous albums. Also, if you're a Metallica fan, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on those future album reviews for Metallica when they do come out. Now, let's just get started right with this review of Load here, probably one of Metallica's more controversial albums, I guess you could say. While Metallica's previous album, the Black Album, kind of saw them change their sound from thrash metal to a more typical, traditional heavy metal sort of sound, Load kind of continues with the same idea of moving away from thrash metal, but this time Metallica kind of keep with the heavy metal sound while adding some elements of hard rock, blues rock, and occasionally some other genres that we're going to be talking about later on in more detail. But of course, this album here saw a bit of a change, of course, given that while it is still a more typical heavy metal album, kind of like the Black Album, it did have some of those newer influences in it that many old Metallica fans weren't exactly digging. Gone are the really fast and thrashy riffs of previous albums, instead replaced by some longer ballad type songs as well as some more, typical hard rock kind of jams that would go on to make lots of success for Metallica with radio play. That's another thing that's important to note about this album, as well as some of the other Metallica albums released around this time period, such as the Black Album as well as this album's follow-up, Reload, is that lots of the songs from these albums would become major successes on rock radio and just the radio in general. We talked about Enter Sandman in my last review and just how big that song has become. It's pretty much inescapable, that track. People who don't even know metal music know that song. And the same thing could be applied to some of the tracks from Load as well as its follow-up album, Reload. Let's take the track, of course, King Nothing from this album, which sounds a lot like Enter Sandman, to be honest, just with the structure of the track. Many people do kind of consider it a follow-up to that track, sonically speaking, not in terms of the lyrics or anything like that. And I do enjoy this track. In fact, I actually think it's better than Enter Sandman in terms of, the quality of the song itself. It's an enjoyable sort of, traditional sort of heavy metal with a hard rock influence type of track that, it's fun for what it is. It's not Metallica's greatest song, but I enjoy it. I mentioned before that many of the tracks here on this album that would become successful had more of a ballad type feel to them, a bit of a slower song structure, I guess you could say, in general, kind of reminiscent of tracks such as Nothing Else Matters from, their previous album, the Black Album. And I mentioned in my review that I wasn't a big fan of that track, but I do enjoy some of the ballads here. I think Metallica, the more of these that they did, the better they got, I guess you could say, with doing them. Take the track Until It Sleeps, for example, one of Metallica's more well-known ballad-type tracks, and I actually do enjoy this track. While it is definitely slower, it's not exactly heavy by any means, or thrashy at all, far from it. I do enjoy the lyrics here and how they talk about, once again, James' sort of complicated relationship with his mother, and of course, her death as a result of cancer, I believe. I enjoyed the lyrical content here, and I enjoy the guitar parts as well. Just, I think it works for a ballad-type track. I think the vocals here are a bit better than they were on Nothing Else Matters, where I feel like they were really forced and just trying to be kind of this anthemic sort of ballad. Here, I don't really see it like that as much. I think the vocals just fit everything else a bit better here, and I think as a result it ends up being one of Metallica's best ballad songs that they've ever written. Hero of the Day is another ballad-type song that Metallica was able to get radio play with. However, this one does have some more aggressive moments that come up later in the track itself, which I do enjoy. I'm not a big fan of some of those softer moments on the track, but when it gets a bit heavier, I find myself enjoying this track a bit more. It's overall a decent track in my opinion, but I think it's important to talk about probably my favorite sort of ballad, slower track on the album, which is The House Jack Built, which is arguably one of Metallica's more underrated tracks in my opinion. It's a longer leading song in terms of the length, but I enjoy some of the stuff Metallica do here on this song. Lyrically, it talks about addiction, which of course Metallica isn't exactly a stranger to. I mean, there was a reason that they were called Alcoholica at points in their career, but here I like James' vocals and just how they kind of match a bit better with the instrumentation here. Once again, they don't sound really forced or anything like that, especially on the chorus where he kind of goes into this big, these rather large-sounding vocals that just kind of describe the effects of course, abuse and things of that sort. I like the guitar solo here on this track with the talk box effect. It's not exactly something I would have ever expected Metallica to use in one of their songs, at least in the way that they're kind of using it here on the guitar. I guess you could say that they had something similar on the track For Whom the Bell Tolls from Ride the Lightning with the bass guitar in that intro. But here it's very different with how it's used. Of course, it's being used for the actual electric guitar here, and it's being used kind of for the solo. It just provides a very sort of uneasy sounding feel to this solo that works well with the track. The track itself just kind of has this really uneasy sort of, feel to it that you can kind of sense that the narrator is like about to lose their mind or something as a result of whatever addiction that they have, and they just want to break kind of this addiction that they have, and that this solo kind of carries that emotional feeling of just teetering the edge of like sanity and insanity as a result of this addiction, if that makes any sense at all. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way, but I just really find myself enjoying this track. It's probably my favorite song on the album, and it's a really underrated Metallica song, especially for a slower, more ballad type track. Another more interesting, more ballad-leaning track here in the track listing is Mama Said, which most Metallicas might know as that kind of country song that Metallica has, because there are some country influences here on this track. Not really like modern country influences, more like older style country influences, as well as some blues influences, more hard rock kind of sound in there as well. And once again, it kind of deals with James Hetfield and his mother again, as far as the lyrical subject matter goes. And in terms of my own thoughts on this track, I'm a bit conflicted with it. I'm not really a fan of country music as a genre. I definitely have respect for some of the older artists and things of that sort, but it's not exactly my cup of tea, if you know what I'm saying. So as a result, I'm not exactly a big fan of the country influences here on the track. Some people, I guess if you're into country, maybe you will like it, but I can tell that there's a reason why many Metallica fans don't like it, because, thrash metal and country music aren't exactly in the same ballpark, like, at all. But, I enjoy some of the heavier aspects of the track. I enjoy the lyrical content of the track. Overall, I just kind of have mixed feelings on the track as a whole. It's not one of my favorites, but it's definitely an interesting experiment, and I do kind of like seeing Metallica go out of their comfort zone with some of these tracks here. Some of the tracks that lead off this project, like 8 Mile and 2x4, are also really enjoyable kind of hard rock, somewhat metal tunes that are just a more aggressive way to start off this project. They really grab your attention and are just, overall rather enjoyable. In fact, I have to say the beginning of this album might be the best part. Like tracks 1 to 5, or maybe even 1 to 7 if you want to include the next 2 tracks that follow, King Nothing, I find myself enjoying a good amount. But ultimately, this project's greatest flaw, in my opinion, it has nothing to do really with the sound change that's present here, kind of going for that more blues rock or hard rock kind of sound. I think it really just has to do with the length of this project. It's just too long. For some reason, around this time in their career, Metallica made the wise decision that they were going to try to make every single one of their albums as long as they possibly could. Because honestly, from here on out in Metallica's discography, I had this complaint with pretty much all of their albums, and that's just that they're too long. Now, Metallica's previous albums were definitely a bit on the longer side for thrash metal, usually breaking 50 minutes, going longer than that, maybe even an hour in length. But, I enjoyed them. I didn't think they ran too long for the content that we were given, considering that they were some of the best thrash metal albums that we ever really got, from music as a whole. I enjoyed the fact that maybe they were a little bit longer. But this album is an hour and 18 minutes and 59 seconds, so almost an hour and 19 minutes, almost getting close to an hour and a half, really. And I believe that this was as long as they could make the album, in terms of actually, fitting it on a record, I guess. I believe that's what it was. At the time period. Of course, nowadays with music, you can make your album pretty much as long as you want, since most people just buy digitally or stream it or illegally download it. But back then, I guess, physically releasing it on, a record or something like that, or maybe it was a CD, if I'm remembering correctly. If you know the exact answer to that, leave it down in the comments down below, or maybe I'll actually just find out myself and leave a mark here on the screen somewhere. But essentially they had to kind of cap it off at this time limit, an hour, 18 minutes, 59 seconds, in order to, I guess, have it fit on whatever media they were releasing it on. Because the last track on the album, The Outlaw and Torn, which was already a very long song, it's almost 10 minutes long, there's actually a longer version of this track, but they had to cut out some of the instrumental part, in order for it to fit. And, while I am usually a fan of artists creatively, picking their own songs for the album and things of that sort, Metallica, they really didn't, cut anything out here, I'm guessing. Because we get 14 tracks, many of them are rather long in length, like The Outlaw Torn, which I mentioned before, as well as Bleeding Me, which is another track that gets close to 10 minutes in length, as well as some of these other tracks that are 5 minutes, 6 minutes long, like The House Jack Belt, though I really like that song, as I said before. And honestly, the big problem here, as well as some of Metallica's later albums, is that there's a lot of filler that could be cut out here, especially in the third quarter of this album. I feel like, just really the second half overall, I think there's lots of tracks that could be cut out. The first half of the album, I think, is arguably the strongest point of it. If they had cut out some of the later tracks here, I think it would have been, you know, a better project overall because it's not so long and grating on you. Because when I go to listen to this project, it feels a bit like a chore just because it's so long. It's just quantity over quality here, and it's not to say that there aren't quality tracks on this album, and that's not to say that there are really any terrible tracks here on the album. It's just the project is so long that, you know, it begins to wear on you after a while. Did we really need tracks like Ronnie and Wasting My Hate here on this album? I mean, they're not the worst thing in the world, but I could have done without them, to be honest. It's just, this project began the unfortunate trend of Metallica albums being way too long. Come on, guys. You gotta cut things down a bit more. Maybe release some of those leftover tracks on a later album or something, or as like a B-side collection or something like that. At least then I can understand why the tracks may not be quite as good in quality, but instead you end up with a really bloated album that just has a lot of filler tracks on it, with some gems sprinkled in there, you know, every so often, particularly in the first half of this album in this case. So overall, I think that's this album's greatest flaw, as well as some of Metallica's other later albums' greatest flaw. It's just the length of the project, not being able to shorten it down to a very, you know, acceptable length, in my opinion. That's something that earlier Metallica albums got right, but it's not something that you really notice until you look at it in the context of the greater discography is Metallica, really. But overall, as I said earlier, despite the fact that this album is really long and at times a bit of a chore to get through, there are some rather great tracks here in this track listing, like the House Jack Belt or Until It Sleeps, that are really make going through this project worthwhile. There might be some, you know, throwaway tracks or tracks that just don't really stand out all that much, but as I said before, there's no tracks that I think are really, you know, bad or painful to listen to or anything like that. They're just kind of forgettable. So, you know, that's not the worst thing in the world, to be honest. Like I said, if they had just shortened things here, I think this would have been a bit of a better album. But then again, the sound change may also turn some people off here. Honestly, I don't really have a problem with them moving away from thrash towards something new, as well as they could do it well. And they kind of demonstrate here that they can at times, like on tracks like The House Jack Built and Until It Sleeps, like I mentioned before, they can do that more ballad-type track in a bit of a better method than they had in earlier albums. But here, overall, you know, the length of the album just kind of makes this an average project overall, in my opinion. It's not one of Metallica's best, but at the same time, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be, in my opinion. There are some great tracks here, there are some good tracks, there are some average tracks, and then there are just some forgettable tracks. Overall, in my opinion, it's a decent album. If you're a fan of Metallica, you should probably check it out because they do have some interesting material here on this album. But at the same time, it's no project that you should be rushing to go check out, especially if you haven't heard some of their classic albums yet, or even some of the albums that they would put out later on in their career, like Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Overall, it's a decent album, and you should check it out if you're a Metallica fan, or just some heavy metal fan. But if you've never liked Metallica, really, you're probably not going to like this project. If you only like thrash Metallica, you're probably not going to like this project. If you don't like Metallica really experimenting with new things, you're probably not going to like this project. And if you don't like long albums, you're probably not going to like this project. Overall, I think that sums up my review for this project pretty well, and I've said the word project way too many times in that one sentence. So, if you enjoyed this video, I'd greatly appreciate if you leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future Metallica album reviews, as well as don't forget to check out those older ones I already did because, of course, if you like Metallica, you'd probably like those because, you know, they're reviews for Metallica. Comment down below your thoughts on the album. What did you think of it? Because, you know, I'm rather interested to hear your thoughts on this more controversial Metallica album. Certainly not the most controversial, but definitely up there in my opinion. Thank you for watching, and stay golden.